And we're now joined by the man, the myth, the legend, college football analyst for ESPN, Greg McElroy. Greg, I want to start right here because we had your co-host, Cole Kubelik, on not too long ago. Auburn grad, obviously. How much Iron Bowl smack talk is there for y'all on a week-to-week basis?
It's quite a bit. To be completely transparent, we've been on the winning side for a while. So Cole is one of my best friends, and I really try to be as understanding as I can about how delicate that can be. I mean, after all, when I got to Alabama, we were at that point in the midst of a 4-game losing streak to Auburn, and I know how agonizing losses number 5 and loss number 6 was for us. So I try to be respectful of that, and knowing that my granddad is also an Auburn grad, anything I throw at him, I know is going to come back a little bit harder than the way I threw it at him. So I try to be respectful, but yeah, there's a decent amount of banter on a pretty regular basis, more so with other sports. Football, not as much, but with basketball, with gymnastics, with baseball, softball, what have you, that's really where our true colors start to come out.
That's very considerate of you, then, not creating a hostile work environment for your co-host. That seems like just a good overall move by you.
I just wouldn't want HR to get involved. You know, I mean, like HR getting involved because of a hostile work environment wouldn't be good for anybody.
Bad news. Bad news on all fronts. Well, let's start here. Everybody and anybody is interested in the quarterback battle going out of Alabama, to put it lightly. Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson, a couple of freshmen in there. Do you have a feel on that as it pertains to a leader in the clubhouse right now?
You know, I think one thing that we need to first take into account, what is Alabama's offense going to be? What do they want to be? That's probably the trickiest part of the evaluation process, as they're breaking in a new offensive identity with Tommy Rees coming down from Notre Dame. I get the sense, just having been around Tommy and having gotten to know Tommy, he wants to step on your face with a hobnail boot. That's who he is. And he wants to run the ball downhill. He wants to have a team that practices and emphasizes being physical along the line of scrimmage. That's who he is. And that's the way his Notre Dame teams played. So I think in order to first understand the quarterback competition, we must first look at the offensive identity that they're going to lean on and what their points of emphasis will be. Now, based on all accounts, Jalen Milroe's taken a lot of really nice strides forward this spring. And I would say because of his athleticism and knowing how many off-schedule plays have occurred, not just for Alabama, but across college football, that athleticism, that explosiveness, being, arguably the most gifted guy with the ball in his hands on the entire roster, that would go a long way in allowing him to keep hold of that starting quarterback job. But there are issues, because sometimes when you let someone down and you have a disappointing performance as it relates to ball security, those are difficult things to forget. And that's a difficult narrative to adjust. That was clearly something he struggled with last year. 5 turnovers in limited playing time. The team by itself, I think, only had 18. So he accounted for roughly a third of the turn. I think it was 16, actually. He accounted for roughly a third of those turnovers, and the most obvious examples of those would have been against A&M. So I think that is going to be a difficult thing for him to shake. But his athleticism, I think, does give him an advantage over Ty Simpson, knowing that if a play breaks down, he can still potentially take it the distance.
And you said it a little bit in terms of the scheme they're going to run offensively. With so many people had an opinion on what Bill O'Brien did do or didn't do last year, and that's all hindsight. When you look to what they will be offensively under Tommy Rees, does Ty Simpson maybe have a little bit more of a tailored skill set to that scheme in general, in your mind?
I think it's a very fair parallel to draw, just seeing what Tommy Rees has gone with in the past. Obviously last year with Drew Pine, but it's important to recall that Drew Pine was not the starter coming out of fall camp. That designation went to Tyler Buckner, who is more like Jalen Milroe than he is Drew Pine, or than he is Ty Simpson, being a guy that's going to heavily emphasize the run game in its own right and has a lot of raw horsepower. And then you look back to Ian Book too. Ian Book, I thought, was a very underappreciated player, did a lot of little things, was a much more effective runner than people would probably remember. So I think when you look at what Tommy Rees was as a player, you naturally draw inclinations. Well, he wants to kind of lean more into the prototypical pocket passer that's going to be able to get in and out of run checks, be able to get in and out of run to pass audibles and adjustments like that. Those are all possibilities, and those are all things that he's leaned on in the past. But I don't think that's going to be carbon copy of what he's going to be at Alabama. When you become the OC at Alabama, you learn the offense that Nick Saban knows, and you implement your own plays with that vernacular. So, first of all, I think Bill O'Brien gets a really bad rap. They had Bryce Young. The offensive line was a liability, and it was for 2 years under his leadership. And there's only so much that you can do. Everyone's like, why don't you run the ball? Why don't you run the ball? Well, every time you run the ball, you take the ball out of Bryce Young's hands. So when you build the offense around your best player and you build the offense around the quarterback in particular, you're going to sacrifice toughness. I don't care what the circumstances are. You want to build an offense around a quarterback, you're going to sacrifice line of scrimmage emphasis. And if you emphasize RPO, run pass option, you're probably not going to be as good in the run game because the offensive linemen can't fire off the ball with the same level of intensity, knowing that if they get beyond 3 yards when the ball is released, guess what? It's an illegal man downfield. So I think RPO-centered offense has a place in football naturally, but if you really want to win along the line of scrimmage, it can't be your bread and butter. It has to be your changeup to what is hopefully an excellent fastball. And I think they went really in the RPO direction under Tua Tagovailoa. They went back to a little bit more prototypical hard play action run game with Mac Jones and standard drop back with Mac Jones. And they went obviously standard drop back with Bryce Young, but with the offensive line breaking down the way they did at times over the last couple of years, it kind of took away from what he could do all the time. So I think Bill O'Brien gets a little bit of a bad rap. I think he was an excellent play caller, but I do think the offense took a couple steps back in areas where they had traditionally been great. And that's why I think most Bama fans were frustrated with his tenure.
Greg, you played quarterback for Nick Saban. Also got a national championship under Nick Saban. So you know a thing or two about playing quarterback for the GOAT. What are some of the key factors he's evaluating these guys during spring practice and into fall camp to be the starting quarterback at Bama?
Well, he really focuses a lot on physical skill set is obvious, right? You got to be able to throw it accurately. You got to be able to throw it with enough velocity to make all the throws and to put stress into the defense in every square inch of the field. So those are non-starters. If you can't do that, you got no shot. I mean, it's not even, don't choose Alabama. It's just not, it's not going to happen. So same reason why, he's not going to recruit a 5'8" corner that runs 4'8". It's just you have to have a certain skill set to play there. So that goes without saying. The next part is decision making. You have to understand where you fit within the scheme. You have to understand what you can do and can't do, because anytime you put the defense in a short field situation, that's obviously going to be a problem. And even more so of a problem because your head coach is cut from a defensive cloth. The other thing that I think, evaluates probably as well as anybody is the gravitational force that is the quarterback position. And you have to have a specific personality to play for him. He's going to be tough on you. There's no denying that. That's a good thing. I mean, some guys welcome it. Some guys shy away from it. I, for one, and I think pretty much everyone that's played for him welcomes the wrath that comes when you walk to the sideline after making a bad play. You just have to. You know it's coming. It is what it is. But also at the same time, he evaluates as well as anybody, because if you think back over the course of his tenure, how many times has he made the wrong decision? At quarterback specifically. You could say, well, 17, he should have started Tua over Jalen. He had won, 30 games as a starter, or 28 games as a starter, 26 games as a starter, up until that 2017 national championship game when he was pulled at halftime. He hasn't made mistakes at the position. I mean, he's done a pretty good job and ultimately has gone with the right guy each and every year, dating all the way back to 2007 when he got to Tuscaloosa. So I think he recognizes who is the guy that the players are playing for. Who is the guy that the offensive line is going to block just a little bit longer for? Who's the guy that after he comes out of the game or after he gets through with his 6 practice reps that he's going to run in a row, who's the guy that the wide receivers are gravitating towards to have conversations with? He always describes it as, I want someone to win the team. And when the guy wins the team, then the decision is made, because the players are going to follow the best player, but they're also going to follow the best leader. And that becomes evident as you get through the thousands of reps that you will in both spring, summer, and in fall camp.
And you were a part of the team that ended up, dropping one to Utah and then coming back the next year and winning the national title. And it feels like every so often the national media wants to say the game's passed Saban by, or, maybe he doesn't still have the juice anymore. And then right when that happens, he ends up winning a national title the next season. In your estimation, what's going on right now internally after Alabama is supposedly falling apart after losing 2 games by like 1 point?
Well, I think externally people are saying, well, Alabama's not what they've been, because a lot of people are focusing on, well, they only lost a couple games by a very thin margin, but they only won a couple games by a very thin margin as well. So people are looking at it on both sides of the coin, which I think is fair and understandable. But I would say, man, if you bet against them and if you doubt Nick Saban's process, I think you need to be prepared to eat crow. I mean, I will always feel that way. Maybe that's blind loyalty. Maybe that's just a trust in the program. But I've seen guys come and go, players come and go, coaches come and go, coordinators come and go, and the expectation and the standard remains the same. Now, winning a national championship is hard. And I think a lot of people around Tuscaloosa and around the state of Alabama and around the Southeast, they said, look at it, well, if you don't win the championship, it's a lost year. Bryce Young told us that last year in person on our radio show, said, hey, last year was a failure. We lost in the national championship. It's like, no, it's not. To me, that's not a failure. Look, ultimately, yes, you want to win the national championship. I'm not going to tell anybody to settle. I'm not going to tell anyone to be happy with a 10-3. No, absolutely not. You want to win the national championship, but there's only one out of 132 that can do that every year. So if your expectations and or your success is determined exclusively by bringing home a national championship trophy, you're going to be let down a whole lot more than you're excited. And I think that, I'm not trying to say that people need to reset their expectations, but I think they need to understand that a national championship is not a birthright. It has to be earned, and it's very difficult to achieve. So they're going to be in the mix. They're always in the mix. It's just when those games get close, like they did at times last year, will they be able to make the 2-minute drive? Will they be able to go down the field in a 15-play drive, taking 7 minutes off the clock to beat Auburn on the road? Will they be able to climb out of a hole and ultimately be the team that has the lead when the clock strikes 0? Those are the things, because the margins compared to what they were are smaller. You can't deny that. But it doesn't mean that they don't have the goods to make a run yet again in 23, 24, 25, 26, and beyond.
And Greg, you said something that I think is fascinating. The margins, especially in the SEC right now, feel pretty small. Because, Georgia's back-to-back national champs, but then you have Tennessee, who seems like they're surging. LSU in year 2 under Brian Kelly, they're surging. Alabama's still Alabama as far as I'm concerned. How wide open is the SEC in your mind?
Well, not mentioned there is LSU, who going into year 2 under Brian Kelly, a team that really overachieved last year. I think the sky's the limit, right? You should feel very excited around Baton Rouge about what comes back and understanding that even though some of the guys that depart the program aren't ultimately going to hurt the program because of their departure. So I think LSU is a team that's on the rise. And if you look at it, just tell me how many teams right now in the SEC don't feel like the arrow is pointing up, because there's not many. I think if you go across the board, Vanderbilt, arrow pointing up. The traditionals where you're like, I don't know, Vanderbilt's better under Clark Lee than they were under Derek Mason at the end of his tenure. Kentucky right now, in comes Devin Leary, back comes Liam Cohen. Arrow feels like it might be pointing up. Tennessee, arrow feels like it's pointing up. South Carolina, arrow feels like it's pointing up. Florida would be one where you're like, I'm not really sure right now. But last year, after you get drubbed by 4 touchdowns against Oregon State, not sure you can go any lower than that if you're the Florida Gators. Now, the schedule's tough this year, and ultimately you might have to go down just a little bit before you start to ramp up. But that's all part of the natural process of building a program at the foundational level. A&M can't get any worse than they were last year. Arrows pointing up. Ole Miss, little bit of a question mark. I think last year they were a question mark and somehow found a way to be pretty dang competitive, especially knowing that they lost so many pieces off of one of the best teams in program history. Mississippi State's a bit of a question mark, but you got to think the arrow might be pointed up. They've done a pretty good job defensively the last couple of years. Now they're going to complement that defense with a quality run game, with what they bring in now with a new offensive coordinator that's going to be a little bit more balanced. Missouri feels pretty steady. I mean, to me, I think you'd have to honestly work hard to find teams throughout the footprint right now that don't feel like things are getting better. Auburn, things feel like they're getting better. I think everyone feels like they're on the upswing. Now, ultimately, you can't win every game. I mean, they got to play each other. So it's going to come down to matchups. But I think if you asked or were to take the temperature of most fan bases in the SEC, they all feel pretty good about where they're at. And I think most of them probably feel like the best is in front of them.
And Greg, 2 other schools you could add to that and will add to that in 2024 is Texas and Oklahoma. I think those 2 fan bases also feel like they've got a really exciting future ahead of them even before they get to the SEC. Now, you played your high school football in the state of Texas, so I want to get your thoughts on this before we get you out of here. Who is better positioned to win the SEC upon arrival, Texas or Oklahoma?
So much of it is matchup based. You know what I mean? Like, I'd love to be able to tell you holistically, hey, this program right now, Texas has more talent on the roster. But it depends. I mean, if they draw LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee in their first year, like, things aren't going to go well for the Longhorns. Just like, I think both are in for a little bit of a difficult transition. For instance, look back at when Missouri and Texas A&M joined the league. The league was not as strong in 2012 as it is now. Hence why Missouri backdoored their way into not 1, but 2 SEC championships. Florida with Treon Harris started a game in the SEC championship. I mean, we're talking about an SEC East that is in some ways unrecognizable back in the mid 2010s. So little different era, but I do think Texas and Steve Sarkisian has an understanding of what it needs to look like. And of course, they're going to be active in the NIL world. They're going to be active in the portal world. And I think they actually probably have the best roster returning in the Big 12. So the transition for Texas should be okay. But will they immediately ascend to the top of the league? I have a difficult time forecasting that. I'm also very optimistic on Oklahoma because much like what we just talked about with A&M, it can't get worse than it got last year. That was the worst Oklahoma team, arguably, of my lifetime. And I'm born in 88, but I don't remember Oklahoma before 98. So it literally is the worst Oklahoma team in my lifetime. They're going to be back. I mean, they are a tremendous athletic department. And Brent Venables, he's already knows how to recruit. They've gone after the portal. He recognized quickly where their deficiencies were. Hey, let's go get some D linemen. Hey, let's go make sure that we have a young quarterback to learn under Dylan Gabriel. They're going to be more well versed in Jeff Levy's system. Like, I'm very optimistic about both Oklahoma and Texas this year. So I'm expecting, I know Texas didn't have a down year last year by any stretch, but I'm expecting them to be at the top of the Big 12 this year, probably maybe flirting with 10 wins. Wouldn't shock me. And I would be shocked if Oklahoma is not, somewhere between, 8 and 9 wins in year number 2 for Brent Venables. So I think both are positioned well to transition, but it's really going to come down to who they draw in their permanent crossovers and what things look like with some of their home and away games in those first couple of years.
That neutral site, the Red River, seeing Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC, man, it's going to be a whole lot of fun. Well, Greg, appreciate you making time, man, with all that you got going on with the XFL and getting ready for spring games. Appreciate you joining us, and looking forward to connecting in the fall, brother.
No, absolutely. Thanks again for having me, man. Appreciate you.